NSFW, what is the most fucked up act of humanity that you know of? Saw something similar in Cambodia a few years ago. Walking around Siem Reap, we were constantly getting accosted by women carrying sickly looking babies, like, really sick and emaciated, literally on the verge of death, asking Monet to feed baby, Monet to feed baby. I even got suckered into handing over a small wad of reels to one. It took a while, but we eventually realized that, while the women were different each time, the fucking baby was always the exact same one. They just handed the sneer corpse of a thing from one to the other to help them gain money off of tourists. I doubt it got any food or care from any of them. It probably didn't lie through the week. Yeah, the milk point scam. The baby is drugged and used as a prop. Pretty terrible. Organized gangs drop off / pick up the beggars, with and without babies, basically using them as slaves. Happens in a lot of Asian countries. Link in description. Her death was pretty bad. I read about one that was worse, but I can't find it right now. Well, that was officially the worst thing I've read. Many of the people involved in that crime didn't live past their mid-50s. Weird. I sincerely hope they suffered greatly every day until they died. Those pieces of garbage. I'm sure there are worse, but the one I learned that hit me harder than anything I've ever learned is Empress Lu Zhi. Link in description. Dowager Empress of China around 200 BC. She viewed her dead husband's concubine and her illegitimate son as a threat to her and her son's power. When the current emperor, Lu Zhi's son, left for a hunting trip, Lu Zhi had the illegitimate son killed, then took the concubine to have all four limbs severed, her eyes put out, her ears deafened, her throat muted, and her still living body thrown into a pig pen. Wiki says it was a latrine though. IDK what the truth is, when her son found out what Lu Zhi did, he refused to rule and drank himself to death. For your curiosity, it was both. Or at least so I learned in a course I took about ancient Asia. Latrines at the time were basically pits, and the top of the bit came up under the toilets. Pigs were kept in the pits as cleanup, so the pit she threw the concubine in was a latrine, and also a pig pit. What an unusual fact. Thanks for clarifying. If you're looking for a modern day one, the sentencing documents of Ian Watkins, link in description. The former lead singer of Lost Prophets, are seriously disturbing. Pedophilia and star power are not a good combination. I don't know what the worst part about this is, that if he was able to manipulate / convince / get permission from two women, how many others are there that didn't get caught? These moms women willingly gave their children up and participated in this. It is absolutely sickening. And 35 years is a joke considering what he did. Should be life for one baby, considering his 100% lack of remorse. GCHQ, similar to the NSA, a British intelligence agency with a cryptography wing, got access to his encrypted files in under 24 hours because he'd used a password based on English words. I fuck kids. That was seriously his password. At that point the prosecution doesn't even need to show up. I've read a lot of fucked up shit on Wikipedia, but the killing of Tim McLean was the worst for me. Link in description. After the incident, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, Peter attempted to run an ad in the Portage Daily Graphic comparing the killing of McLean to the consumption of animals. Insensitive fucktards. Peter is toxic. How can they claim to love animals when they think pets are an abomination that must be euthanized? Oscar de la Hoya, link in description. He's called the most evil man in the SS. Wonder what it takes to get that distinction? Atrocities committed by de la Hoya included injecting strychnine into young Jewish female prisoners, previously undressed and whipped, to watch them convulse to death in front of him and his friends for entertainment. Does it get worse? Of course it does. In Warsaw, de la Hoya participated in the Walla massacre, together with police units rounding up and shooting some 40,000 civilians, most of them in just 2 days. 6. In the same Walla district, de la Hoya burned 3 hospitals with patients inside, while the nurses were whipped, gang raped and finally hanged naked, together with the doctors to the accompaniment of music. 6. Later, they drank, raped and murdered their way through the old town, slaughtering civilians and fighters alike without distinction of age or 6. 7. In the Old Town, where about 30,000 civilians were killed, several thousand wounded in field hospitals overrun by the Germans were shot and set on fire with flamethrowers. 6. Reportedly, the de la Hoya Brigade burned prisoners alive with gasoline, impaled babies on bayonets, and stuck them out of windows, and hung women upside down from balconies. 29. There are stories of him raping 12-year-old girls to death with knives. Sick. He probably deserves that title. He was arrested in France in 1945. Unfortunately for him, soldiers guarding him were Polish. He didn't live long. Some would argue that was the more fortunate fate for him. People do not understand that death is a relief. I do not mean that in a suicidal way. It is not a form of punishment. Punishment by death is more punishment to those who care about the offenders than to the offenders themselves. Dead is dead. I was reading an article about how a beggar always had a baby which seemed to be sleeping. Long story short, the baby was always deemed sleeping because the beggar would drug them with heroin or intoxicate them with vodka so that they would be quiet and sleeping the whole time. Sometimes they odd the baby and they die, in which they find other babies to do the same to. Unfortunately, this is not an uncommon practice in several poor countries. Where there is poverty, there is exploitation of the weak, namely children. I've heard stories of some gangs in Karachi, Pakistan beating up children till their bones are broken, so that they can get more sympathy when they are forced to go out and beg. Third worlder here can confirm that gangs sometimes chop off the hands of kids then send them out to beg. It's terrifying to imagine. ISIS beheading children is pretty rough, but Unit 731 in WWII was some next level shit. Absolutely atrocious. Oh my god. I just read up on Unit 731 on Wikipedia. Absolutely horrific. Link for the lazy. Link in description. It kind of explains why China and Japan don't get along, since Japan is still pretty much in denial about it. Japan actively denies almost all of its war crimes from WWII. They don't put it in their history books, and I believe a politician recently made a speech against the statements held against them, saying they were completely false. Toy box killer. Link in description. There's his Wikipedia article. SFW. I believe there's an audio recording / transcript of the speech he'd give to his victims to break them. I remember reading it a long time ago. Very disturbing stuff. To anyone who is considering listening to the speech, make sure you have a day to dedicate to be depressed if you do. Nanking Massacre. Link in description. My ex refused to believe this happened. He says it's propaganda and those photos and stories are faked. He also gave excuses for the Japanese use of comfort women and war rape in general. For those that don't know, comfort women were female POWs that the Japanese military would rape for comfort. So fucking glad he's an ex. Sounds like the Japanese version of a Holocaust denier. The fucked up thing though is that Germany accepts that the Holocaust happened, but most of Japan does not believe in the rape of Nanking. Japanese human experimentation during WW2. Link in description. To determine the treatment of frostbite, prisoners were taken outside in freezing weather and left with exposed arms, periodically drenched with water until frozen solid. The arm was later amputated. The doctor would repeat the process on the victim's upper arm to the shoulder. After both arms were gone, the doctors moved on to the legs until only a head and torso remained. The victim was then used for plague and pathogens experiments. Anesthesia was not used because it was believed that anesthetics would adversely affect the results of the experiments. Convenient loophole for a fucking sadist. As a silver lining, much of what we know about hypothermia and frostbite is because of these experiments. Yay. Joseph Mengele was a pretty sadistic guy, experimenting on twins, children and dwarves in Auschwitz and basically sadistically killing people for science. Link in description. The Junko Furuta. Link in description. Thing was pretty messed up. Agreed. I would have just ended my own life than to go through all that suffering. When the boys refused to let her leave, she begged them on several occasions to kill her and get it over with. So fucked up. Definitely the Jonestown Massacre. Link in description. Apparently the audio tapes are absolutely chilling and potentially NSFW, but I refuse to listen to them. Imagine there is a microphone really far off from a crowd. All their sounds run together and everything sounds the same except volume. That's really all you hear. You hear him say to start, then just the volume of just crowd talking slowly come to halt. It's not shocking or anything, but just very disturbing to hear everything go silent. From what I recall, there was a lot more to it than that. He rambled on for a while. A woman stands up and argues against Jones' decision, and people in the crowd both agree with her and denounce her for being unwilling. Then, you hear crying and protests as he instructs the mothers not to hesitate or resist dosing their children with poison. Eerie stuff to listen to. Here, link in description, is the transcript if anyone wants to read it rather than listen to it. All those who agree that it was a mistake coming to this thread say I. LMAO. Blood farms in India. People kept alive only to give blood. Slowly bled to death on a permanent 4 years. Link in description. Fuck man. Every time I get on the internet there's always one more reason for me to not travel to India. The one that I witnessed personally included some kids torturing a kitten to death back in my country. They kept throwing her high in the air and then they would watch it fall. Worst part was that the kitten survived 4 to 5 falls till it went quiet in the 6th. I couldn't sleep for days and I still can't forget it. Edit. I realize this might pale in comparison to historical acts like WW2, but trust me on this. When you witness it personally with your own eyes, it just multiplies the pain by 1,000 and you won't ever forget it. Reminds me of an old viral video of a lady wearing heels and stomping on kittens. I'm so sorry you had to witness that. Saw that on WTF. Said things I don't regret. Got banned. Would say it again. Fuck her. Fuck her. I watched that video of those 2 insurgents bayoneting that bound civilian in the head for like 4 minutes straight. He lived through the whole thing. Sometimes it would go in. Other times it would bounce of his skull, ribs etc. He was crying the whole time. Then I guess they got bored, or whatever because they shot him. The Mongol Empire would melt humans alive, take their melted fat, and throw it into cities as a siege tactic. The fire that was brought about was almost inextinguishable, and also this fat could very well be the friends and family of whoever it was landing on. To watch Marco Polo. Jasenovac concentration camp. Jasenovac was a death camp that operated during WW2. Unlike most of the Holocaust, this was run by the Croatian Ustase regime, and was even more disgusting and brutal than the death camps operated by Nazi Germany. Even though they had gas at their disposal, the Ustase often opted for more brutal means, such as live incineration, iron bars, throat cutting, and just too many to list here. Here is the wiki, link in description. This is pretty late to the thread, but I think the one that is arguably more fucked up than anything mentioned. There are cartels that buy/kidnap kids and force the kids to beg on the streets. Quite often they will mutilate them for life due to the fact that they earn more money. Kids have had eyes removed, legs crushed etc. This is ongoing and is happening as you read this. The bystander effect. The bystander effect, or bystander apathy, is a social psychological phenomenon that refers to cases in which individuals do not offer any means of help to a victim when other people are present. The probability of help is inversely related to the number of bystanders. In other words, the greater the number of bystanders, the less likely it is that any one of them will help. Link in description. /u/the_bystander_effect. What? Oh cheers. In World War II there were 2 Japanese officers who had a contest to behead the most people with a sword. The winner had around 70. Edit. Just double checked on Wikipedia, and it was worse than I thought. The winner had 106, and the loser had 1 less, and apparently people were cheering for both of them. Agent Motherfucking Orange. Link in description. One of the scariest examples of biological chemical warfare I can think of. The Trail of Tears was pretty fucked up. 2 girls 1 cup. Now when I have your attention. 1992. The war in Bosnia just started. I was 10 years old, and we were fleeing our hometown. The smell of rotten flesh was everywhere. My brother next to me pissed his pants, and stopped talking for days. He was just 5 years old, and he has seen so much shit already. During our fleeing there have been multiple airstrikes on our convoy. We tried to get shelter in some houses, but no one wanted to let us in. Probably out of fear that we will plunder them, or just because we were a different ethnicity. Whatever. We hid where we could, and some places haven't been really sanitary to be honest. After a week of moving from place to place, and village to village, we finally found shelter on a soccer stadium in Croatia, Slavonski Brod. Croatians have been our allies at that point in time. A group of 700 women, seniors and children, with a bunch of armed men who stayed with us to protect us. We even got some food and a place to wash ourselves. To the fucked up part. 2 hours later, our own allies started to grenade the shit out of the stadium. We hid where we could. I still remember the basement of the building under construction next to the stadium, where a group of us fled. Mostly women, children, toddlers. The floor was covered in shit. It was probably used as a toilet. Due to lack of a more private option, I shut my ears, but could still hear the sounds of agony, pain and grenades, and the fucking smell of shit up my nose. The feeling of shit on my feet and hands. They wanted to slaughter us, women, children and seniors. I regret answering this question. War brings the most fucked up shit out of humans, and let the little psycho in 1 of 100 roam freely without fear of consequences. In your age from Slovenia and this, as everything from far fucked up war sends terrible chills down my spine. Hope you're okay now. The Garfield movie. Any regrets, Bill? Garfield? Maybe. I'm literally watching that movie right now. Peshawar Massacre. Link in description. The state of South Dakota appears to be seizing Lakota children under questionable circumstances. Some of these children are being physically and sexually abused, and at least one criminal investigator says that the state is covering it up, all possibly because they get a lot of money from the federal government via Title 40. If you want to join me in calling for investigations, please do so. Action opportunity. Investigate the appearance of a culture of corruption endangering Lakota children. Link in description. I live in SD and haven't heard a thing about this. Horrible. Nazis exterminating millions of people. Jews weren't the only people they exterminated. They also killed gypsies, the retarded, gays, and many other undesirables. See World at War series made in 1974 where they interviewed people who were there. There was a whole episode about it. Saddam Hussein executing undesirables by putting a grenade in their front shirt pocket. I can't remember who, but someone in Africa, putting burning rubber tires around people's necks. US military secretly giving withholding viable proven treatment for black people with syphilis on purpose. Link in description. Tuskegee. Syphilis is the only bacterial disease so nasty it leaves scars on the bones. So archaeologists can tell if a person had syphilis. And a lot of medieval monks had syphilis. None of the men infected was ever told he had a disease, nor was any treated for it with penicillin after this antibiotic became proven for treatment. FEMA ignoring thousands of Katrina survivors in New Orleans for weeks on end, then providing them trailers with poisonous formaldehyde fumes to live in 4 years. FEMA is supposed to be there when stuff like this happens, and they totally dropped the ball. The Catholic Church covering up 1980s child abuse cases for decades. They are supposed to be the moral leaders of the world, and they pull that shit. That is seriously messed up. Rape of Nanking, China. Link in description. WW2 Japanese soldiers raped and killed 40,000 to 300,000 unarmed civilians, and took pictures of it. See sidebar. Contest to kill 100 people with a sword. Link in description. Between 2 Japanese officers. They also sliced babies in half, thirds, and quarters. Link in description. The Tuskegee experiment didn't give syphilis to anyone. They studied the progression of the disease while withholding effective treatment and information. I'd link to a source to back up my assertions, but you already did. I stand corrected. It was still a shady deal. I quote Wikipedia. None of the men infected was ever told he had a disease, nor was any treated for it with penicillin after this antibiotic became proven for treatment.